The wind carried dust through the quiet frontier town as the sun sank low behind the hills, painting the sky in fading gold and crimson. Inside her modest wooden home at the edge of the settlement, Clara Bennett was measuring out the last of her flour when she heard a knock. Slow, hesitant, almost ashamed. Few people visited her anymore. Widowhood had a way of turning a woman invisible in a town that valued families with strong men at their center. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door to find a man standing there, hat clutched to his chest, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. His clothes were worn thin, boots cracked by miles of desperate walking. In his trembling arms lay a baby wrapped in a faded blanket. The child's cries were not loud, but weak, fragile, like a candle flickering against the wind. "Ma'am," the man began, his voice breaking under the weight of pride swallowed whole, "I was told you might have milk. My wife. She passed 3 days ago. I've tried everything. She won't take water. She won't stop crying." Clara felt something tighten inside her chest. She had known loss. She had buried her husband the winter before and, with him, the child she never had the chance to hold. The ache had never left her. It simply settled deep, becoming part of her breathing. She looked at the baby, whose tiny face was flushed with hunger and confusion, and something stirred within her. Not pity, but recognition. The man shifted awkwardly, ashamed of his need. "I can work for it," he added quickly. "Chop wood, mend fences, anything. Just, please." Clara stepped aside without another word. The man entered cautiously, as though afraid kindness might vanish if he moved too quickly. She warmed what little cow's milk she had, but when she tried to feed it to the baby with a cloth, the child turned away, crying harder. The sound pierced Clara in a place she had buried long ago. Instinct rose before thought could stop it. She looked at the father, who stood helplessly by the window, shoulders shaking silently. "May I?" she asked softly. He looked confused at first, then understanding dawned, followed by hesitation. But desperation won. He nodded and stepped outside to give her privacy. Clara sat in her rocking chair, cradled the baby close, and held her as if she had always belonged there. The child's cries softened, then stopped entirely, replaced by the quiet rhythm of life being sustained. Tears streamed down Clara's face, not from sadness, but from a strange, overwhelming sense of purpose. For the first time since her own loss, her arms did not feel empty. When the father returned, he found his daughter asleep against Clara's chest, peaceful and safe. He sank into a chair and covered his face, overcome. "I don't know how to repay you," he whispered. Clara looked down at the tiny fingers wrapped around her own and said something that surprised even herself. "Some debts aren't meant to be repaid. Some are meant to be shared." That night, the man, whose name was Thomas, told her of his wife's sudden fever, of nights pacing with a crying newborn, of the crushing fear of failing the one person who still depended on him. Clara listened, and in his grief she heard an echo of her own. When he prepared to leave, she noticed how uncertainly he adjusted the baby in his arms, how fear shadowed every movement. "You cannot do this alone," she said gently. Pride flared in his eyes, but exhaustion extinguished it just as quickly. "What are you saying?" he asked. Clara took a steady breath. "I am saying the child needs more than milk. She needs steadiness. She needs arms that are not shaking. She needs a mother." Silence filled the room. Outside, the wind howled like a warning, but inside, something new was being born. Thomas looked at Clara not as a stranger now, but as someone who had stepped into his darkest hour without asking for anything in return. "And what do you need?" he asked quietly. Clara glanced around her small, lonely home. "I need to be needed." That was how it began. Not with grand declarations, but with a shared understanding that love sometimes grows from broken places. The baby returned the next morning. And the next. Days turned into weeks, and the sound of crying was replaced with laughter echoing off wooden walls. Clara did not replace the child's mother, she honored her by stepping into the space love had left behind. And Thomas, watching from the doorway one afternoon as Clara soothed the baby with a lullaby, realized that sometimes help arrives not as charity, but as grace. If this story touches your heart already, stay with us, because what happens next will show you that family is not always born, sometimes it is chosen. And if you believe in stories of second chances and unexpected love, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next chapter of hope. seasons changed quietly in the frontier town, and with them, the fragile arrangement between Clara and Thomas deepened into something neither of them had dared to name. What began as survival became routine, and routine slowly transformed into belonging. The baby, whom they named Lily, began to recognize Clara's voice before anyone else's. Her tiny hands reached instinctively toward the woman who had answered a knock at dusk without hesitation. Clara rose in the night without complaint, learned the rhythms of Lily's cries, the difference between hunger and fear, between discomfort and loneliness. Thomas tried to shoulder as much responsibility as he could, but he worked long hours repairing wagons and hauling freight, determined to build stability where tragedy had left a void. Each evening, he returned to find Clara by the hearth, Lily nestled in her arms, the house warm not only from firelight but from something deeper. The town noticed. Whispers began, as they often do in small places where stories travel faster than truth. Some questioned the arrangement, others judged quietly from behind lace curtains. But Clara had spent too long living according to expectations that had brought her nothing but silence. She had discovered something far more powerful than approval, she had discovered purpose. One afternoon, as a storm rolled in and thunder rattled the windows, Lily developed a fever. The memory of Thomas's wife's illness loomed like a shadow over the house. Fear gripped Thomas so tightly he could barely breathe. Not again, he muttered, pacing. But Clara remained steady. She cooled Lily's forehead with damp cloths, whispered reassurances into the child's ear, and refused to let panic claim the room. Through the night she sat awake, rocking gently, humming songs her own mother had once sung. By dawn, the fever broke. Thomas collapsed into a chair, relief washing over him like rain after drought. He looked at Clara, exhausted, pale, but unwavering, and understood fully what had already become true. She was Lily's mother in every way that mattered. Weeks later, Thomas stood outside the small church at the center of town, hat in hand once more, but this time not in desperation. Inside, Clara waited, Lily cradled in her arms. It was not a grand ceremony, nor was it planned in haste. It was simply a promise. To raise the child together, to honor the past without being chained to it, to build something stronger than sorrow. Clara had not given birth to Lily, but she had chosen her. And sometimes choice is more powerful than circumstance. Years passed, and the story of that knock at dusk became part of family lore. Lily grew into a spirited child with her mother's gentleness and her father's resilience. On quiet evenings, Clara would sit on the same porch where she had once felt the weight of loneliness, now watching Lily chase fireflies across the yard. Thomas would sit beside her, their shoulders brushing in comfortable silence. "You saved us," he said once, his voice thick with gratitude. Clara shook her head. "No," she replied softly. "We saved each other." The truth was simple yet profound. Motherhood is not defined solely by blood, but by presence, sacrifice, and love given freely. Clara had become the mother Lily needed not because she was asked to, but because she chose to answer a cry with compassion instead of caution. And in doing so, she healed parts of herself she had believed were lost forever. There will always be moments in life when someone stands at your door, sometimes literally, sometimes in ways less visible, carrying a need too heavy to bear alone. How you respond in that moment can change destinies, including your own. Clara could have offered a bottle and closed the door. Instead, she opened her heart. And that made all the difference. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness can rewrite futures and that family is built by love as much as by birth, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More powerful stories of courage, compassion, and unexpected miracles are waiting for you. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of mercy create the greatest legacies.